Get your ears wrapped around the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast. All the scoop you need to know, from college basketball to the NBA and even March Madness. News of your rising stars, topics on and off the hardwood. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast.
Welcome into the GSMC Basketball Podcast, right here on the GSMC Podcast Network. It is your host, Brice Lewis, back at it again to discuss everything happening in the world of basketball. And we have another good show for you today on the GSMC Basketball Podcast, as we have the debut of the Big Three in Brooklyn. We're going to talk about that on today's show. We're going to talk about the Big Three in Brooklyn, what they did, how they did in their first game against the Cleveland Cavaliers. We're also going to talk about the Chicago Bulls not looking to move on from their star player, Zach LaVine. Lonzo Ball is in trade rumors once again. We'll talk about that. Embiid has been playing like a beast recently. We got to talk about how he continued to impress against Boston. Trae Young looks like he's getting back on track after a big comeback victory for the Atlanta Hawks. How good are the Spurs really? Maybe one of the surprising teams of this early season, and other NBA news on today's show. So as you can tell, we obviously have a bunch of stuff that we will be hitting on today's show. So definitely look forward to talking, discussing, debating, all of that with you guys today on the podcast. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. So, the Nets, Big Three. Big game against Cleveland. Not technically in terms of the team they win against, but because, it's the Big Three. The debut of Kyrie, James, and Kevin Durant. Coming to a game against them. 2 overtimes it took in this game. High-scoring affair. Very, very high-scoring affair. And basically, the ending result was actually surprising. The Cavaliers beat the Brooklyn Nets in double overtime. 147-135. If you look at the final stats, James Harden didn't really shoot the ball that much in the first half. He really with Kyrie coming back, allowed Kyrie to do his thing, and really didn't start taking shots till the second half, but recorded his second triple-double as a Brooklyn Net with 21, 10, and 12 on 6 of 14 shooting, 3 of 6 from 3, and 6 of 6 from the line. So Harden played 51 minutes. Kevin Durant, 38, 12, and 8, has played excellent. Just, even during Kyrie's aspect, he's played some of his best basketball of the season right now. He played 50 minutes. Kyrie, it was crazy coming back, talking about conditioning was a concern for him. Coming back into this game and now, playing 48 minutes, 37 points, 15 of 28 shooting, 3 of 8 from 3, 4 of 3 of 5 from high, had 3 blocks in this game. KD had 4 blocks in this game. I mean, just overall, you can see the offensive firepower. Jeff Green had 16, DeAndre Jordan had 13, and the next highest scoring net was Joe Harris out the bench with 6. So that was the Nets. They obviously showed on the offensive end they were very explosive. But the Cavaliers were not to be basically outplayed. And Colin Sexton led all scorers with 42, including a game-tying 3. And then going off in the second overtime, scoring 20 points in the second overtime, Cleveland did, to defeat the Brooklyn Nets 147-135. Osman had 25, Larry Nance had 15, Drummond had 13. Taurean Prince and Jared Allen, 2 of the former Nets who were traded to the Cavaliers, had 17 and 7 and 12 and 11. And you can clearly see Cleveland got a very good win. And just very impressive, just all in amounts. And so, here's the thing with the Brooklyn Nets, if I take my observation from the first Big Three game. So first, we clearly see the Brooklyn Nets are going to be probably one of the top offensive teams in the NBA this year. Their offensive firepower is through the roof. They are going to probably average almost 120 points a game, probably, with this type of offensive firepower. So when you go against Brooklyn night after night, you're going to have to outscore them. They just have so much offensive talent. A lot of shooting, really. And so you're going to have to really have your A game on the offensive end if you're going to be able to beat a team like this. But now we have to talk about the weakness, the defensive side of the ball. If you look at the defensive side of the ball, they let up 157 to Cleveland. And actually, my bad, 147. And this is against a Cleveland team who has the worst offensive rating in the league. Because that's the biggest issue they're going to have going forward, is they're not a great defensive team. Now, before the trade of James Harden, they were 15th. They were in the middle of the pack defensively, which means some days they may give up a lot of points. Some days they may have a great defensive performance. But there's going to be a lot of inconsistencies, and clearly there's holes in defense. With the James Harden trade and getting rid of a Taurean Prince and a Jared Allen, probably two of the best defenders they had, they have now officially made themselves probably one of not the worst defensive teams in the league. Because Kyrie really isn't that great. The best on-ball defender they have on the floor, basically, is Kevin Durant. Because Kevin Durant can play defense. You know, he has a wingspan. You know, obviously, if you may be a little bit bigger, you may be able to back him down, but he can play defense. But everybody else on the floor is somewhat of a defensive liability. James is a little bit better, but still not great. DeAndre Jordan can block some shots, but he's not a great on-ball, post-up defender either. And so they're going to have to outscore teams if they're going to win, because it just feels like there's going to be track meets. Remember earlier this season against the Hawks, before James Harden, but Kyrie and KD were playing. The first game, they scored 144 to 141, I believe, was the score. So clearly, you saw no defense was played that game, but this is basically the second time Brooklyn has allowed a team to score 140 points this season. 140 points. That's usually what people put up in the All-Star. This is what people used to put up in the All-Star game. In regular NBA game, where you're actually at least trying a bit to play some defense, you're letting up 140 points. That just shows you how much of a lack of a defensive team you have. Because there's no reason for you to be letting up those kind of points, those kind of numbers in the NBA like this. This is why people say there's no defense played in the NBA. Because you really have teams sitting here and players saying, well, we know we can outscore teams. It's kind of like how Houston was. They tried to outscore you. The Phoenix Suns were back in the day. They tried to outscore you. They knew they weren't going to be that great defensively. They were just trying to outscore you. And so, listen, it could work. Potentially it could work out. But, you know, that's a risky way to play if you're Brooklyn. Because you're really hedging on the fact that you could outscore teams. Now, I think if you're Brooklyn, I don't think they have any assets in terms of a trade. Unless they somehow said, okay, we may want to get rid of Kyrie Irving. They don't really have any assets to trade. So definitely look at the buyout market when Brooklyn gets close to the trade deadline, because if there's any potential defensive bigs they could pick up, or 3D guys they could pick up, definitely do not be surprised to see Brooklyn go after a guy. Because there's no way they could sit here, even though they have some of the best offensive talent in the league, can say, we are comfortable keeping the team exactly the way it is with no additional upgrades. Because you're going to have to add some pieces on the defensive end just to, listen, you may not be an elite defensive team. That's probably not going to happen with the team you assemble. But at least having some guys you could say, hey, we need you to play some good minutes on the defensive end because we have so much scoring from three guys. Remember, all three of them combined basically for literally 90 points. So, you know, offensively, you know, we have that. We just got to improve defensively. You know, and also I think with teams like this, it could be much easier to have a defined role because literally, you know, okay, it's not like I have to score, defend. I may have to do a couple of running of the offense because of the way the team's constructed. It's literally, well, we know KD, Kyrie, and James are going to do their thing. So what do I need to do? Maybe I need to focus a little bit more on rebounds. Just put all my energy in rebounding. Put all my energy into the defense. Put all my energy in when I get an open shot, taking the three. It's a little bit easier than like when you're on a team that maybe isn't as good, because even if you're just a 3-and-D guy and that may be your best situation, you may have to handle the ball more, be more on ball, potentially, depending on the way the team is constructed, because the team isn't good enough where you have to do more to be able to make the team good enough. Where with Brooklyn, you could kind of easily have defined roles. It's kind of what the Lakers did, like I said, when Dwight Howard and them came in last year. They had very defined roles. They know, okay, this is all we really want you to do. Anything else is extra. And so you could put all your energy and focus into that. And when you have that, it sets us for a really good situation. So overall, I think that, the team itself looks really good offensively. We just know defensively there's going to be an issue. But trust me, if there were fans, every team, every fan from every fan base would love to come see a game with the Brooklyn Nets, just because they know very high chance there's going to be offensive fireworks. There's going to be a lot of scoring, a lot of threes, a lot of jumpers. You get to see KD, Kyrie, and James. It just seems like a huge game. Now, obviously, a lot of people are looking forward to when the Brooklyn Nets play the LA Lakers. That's going to be a big game. And it's going to be interesting, that matchup, because you think offensively, okay, Nets are the better offensive team. Let's be honest. They're better offensively than the Lakers are. But Lakers are by far the better defensive team. And so it's going to be interesting to see how those two teams clash, especially because one of the biggest weaknesses the Nets have is that they have no interior presence. So if we're talking about Anthony Davis, but you also got to think about how Joel Embiid has been playing recently. He's been playing like a dominant center. He's going to have a field day against the Brooklyn Nets offensively inside because there's nobody who can guard him. And so it kind of reminds you a little bit of Golden State to a certain extent. Remember when they had all that offensive firepower, but their weakness was the interior. They didn't have any interior. But the problem is that they're so great offensively, and they were good defensively on the perimeter. It was like, okay, well, we can at least guard the perimeter, but we may struggle guarding in the interior. Well, Brooklyn literally cannot guard on the perimeter or the interior. So that's a little bit of a difference between the two teams. Because at least, Golden State could say, well, we could throw Clay at you. Draymond could guard some guards. KD could play defense. Some guys come off the bench that we had. Andre Iguodala. We had some good defenders on the team. We just didn't have a perimeter presence, a post presence. Where literally with this Brooklyn team, you don't really feel like you got that one guy. You still got KD defensively, but you really don't have a lot of other guys defensively that you could just say, yeah, he's going to sit there. He's going to put a hard hat on. He's going to go against their best offensive player and put it in. Now, playoff time, I'm sure I wouldn't be surprised to see KD guard somebody's best offensive player. It depends again if they make any changes. They may bring in a guy who they say, okay, we need you to go and guard the best guy, on the other team potentially. Like I said, because there's still changes that could potentially be made to this roster, to this team. But overall, I think just the team, like I said, looks really good on paper. And I think that they're going to be good to go going into the future. So look forward to see more of the Brooklyn Nets and seeing how everything tends to work out with them. But that's all the time we have here for this segment. Coming up next, we're going to get to some more NBA news and topics. So stay tuned right here on the GSMC Basketball Podcast.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Last segment, we discussed the new look Big Three Brooklyn Nets squad. Offensively, they look electric. Defensively, they look atrocious, especially when they gave up 147 points to the worst rated offensive team in all of basketball. Colin Sexton obviously looks like a budding star, but they didn't have Darius Garland, and they still let up that many points. So Brooklyn definitely has an issue on their hands when it comes to the defensive side of the ball. But offensively, they are good to go. Now, before we get into the next set of topics, I would like to remind you guys, please do not forget to follow us on Twitter at GSMC_basketball. That is GSMC_basketball, where we talk about, discuss everything that's happening in the world of basketball, highlights, news, updates, anything basketball related. We'll talk about it on GSMC Basketball Twitter. So definitely stay tuned. Follow us at GSMC_basketball. So, we have some news, or rumors really, about Lonzo Ball. So Lonzo Ball has been very under scrutiny ever since coming into the league. We obviously know about LeVar, the pressure, that he basically put on Lonzo to be this next up-and-coming elite point guard. And, we know about his issues in LA with Luke Walton, why he wasn't able to get off the snide. We felt like, he went to the Pelicans, he'll be able to get off the snide, work on his jump shot. And it still hasn't seemed to have worked out as well in New Orleans as well. But when you see Lonzo play, he's definitely capable. He's still a great passer. He's capable. He's a guy who's like, yeah, he can play. But his issue is just he struggled to produce at a level that people will say, yeah, that's a good starting point guard. He's only averaging 11 points so far this year. That's not what you want to hear. And then his assist numbers aren't even that high either. At least if you're going to average 11 points, have like 9 or 10 assists, so it's like, he's doing something. He's running the offense very well. And so now there's rumors about Lonzo potentially being traded, as there are some teams that are interested in him. The first team that we hear is interested is the Knicks. Obviously, the Knicks may do that move because, listen, the Knicks do need a point guard. They have a need at point guard. Adding Lonzo Ball would actually be a very interesting fit in New York. You have R.J. Barrett, so it'll be a R.J. Barrett, Lonzo Ball backcourt. You got Mitchell Robinson. You got Julius Randle, who basically has played some point forward with the Knicks. The Knicks, they've been up and down this year, but they've been more competitive this year, by far. And maybe adding a guy like Lonzo, a true point guard, may potentially, it's not going to, I won't say take him to the next level, but maybe within that system in New York with Tom Thibodeau, he may be able to reach levels on the court that he hasn't been able to reach consistently with other, the last few, years with the Lakers and then with the Pelicans. And so that move, I could see that working for the Knicks if they wanted to make a move like that. Because like I said, and then also at the end of the day, he is a ball. And that actually has name value. People actually would, if fans were allowed, would sit here and say, Lonzo Ball? Okay. And also, this would definitely make LeVar happy knowing his son is playing in one of the biggest cities. Because now if Lonzo plays really, really well and has those spectacular passes, great alley hoops, and etc., he's really going to stand out more in that New York market at Madison Square Garden. Like, honestly, playing for teams like the Knicks can really make or break your career in terms of fame, in terms of how good you are. Because listen, the Knicks aren't a great team, but they somehow still get primetime games. So, it's definitely something that I think if you're the NBA, for Lonzo if he was able to reemerge or have a resurgence within New York City, it would definitely be a good thing for him. But then the other team that's also interested in Lonzo are the Dallas Mavericks. I've heard the Dallas Mavericks have some interest. That's an interesting that's interesting. You got Luka, being the point, and then you bring in Lonzo. And to me, I think what would happen if they were able to make that trade for Lonzo, they would probably create a system where they may play Luka off the ball more and have Lonzo kind of run it. Because, like I said, Luka's like 6'7", 6'8". So he's really big. He can play 2-guard. And maybe, especially with them losing Steph Curry, this past year, they really have maybe a hole at that backup point position. And maybe Lonzo coming in there, running the show, maybe you could do a 2-man lineup with him and Luka would work, can be variants. You got a guy who can handle the ball for Luka. Luka can, play well off ball, set himself up better, maybe post up Luka. It would just be interesting from that because I think it could create more spacing on the floor potentially. Now, obviously, there two of them are not really the best shooters in the world. So maybe from a shooting perspective, you wouldn't really be, at the greatest place in the world in terms of like, oh, you have threats from the 3-point line. But you do have a guy in Lonzo who can facilitate. And, Dallas does have one of the better offenses in the league. So, and they got guys who can shoot at other positions. So that may still be something that works out for them. Or just Lonzo running the second unit. Because obviously it's very underrated, running that second unit. Because, hey, if you're a big reason of that second unit being successful, you're helping that bench be one of the best benches in the NBA in that potential situation. So that's also something. And then another team that has shown interest, and this would be the biggest team out of all three of these teams, are the LA Clippers. So the LA Clippers have shown interest in acquiring Lonzo Ball. And that would be huge. Because the Clippers feel like they are a point guard away from, in their minds, being the best team in the Western Conference. Because they truly believe they can beat a team like the Lakers. And all they feel like they need to do is they need to add a Lonzo Ball who can, again, and really within the Clippers, whoever the point guard is, they don't really need you to score. They just need you to play make. They need you to help Kawhi and Paul George play more off ball. And set them up, set other teammates up. And Lonzo, like I said, his best attribute is his passing, his playmaking ability. Lonzo can sit here and give you about 10, 12, 15 points a game maybe. But if he can give him about 8, 9 assists, that's going to be huge for the Clippers. And him just being able to run the show and have a point guard who can really handle the ball is, like, as we know, is something that Kawhi Leonard really wants the team to try to go after, is a guy who can handle the ball, a guy who can run the show so he doesn't always have to bring the ball up court. So, to me, I think that's something that that move will make the most impact in terms of, a team maybe trying to compete for a championship. Dallas, I think it can have minimal impact. The Knicks, I feel like, isn't necessarily going to make them a better or a worse team. It definitely can help whatever they're trying to do in New York. It can help in certain situations, but I don't think it's going to necessarily change anything. But I think the Clippers, it actually can have more of a actual resounding effect on the team because of the system that they're trying to run. And so if you're the Clippers, you're obviously keeping an eye out for a point guard all year. And if the Pelicans really say, okay, we're listening to offers for Lonzo Ball, if you're the Clippers, you're going to be like, all right, what do you want from him? Because, like I said, Lonzo has not played to a point where the Pelicans can sit here and hold him for a big draft haul or anything of that nature. They'll have to take a pretty minimal, probably trade back. Maybe get a role player in return. Maybe get a pick. I don't know. You're not going to get anything crazy back for Lonzo Ball, and I'm sure they know that. So the Clippers really could jump on that opportunity and be able to acquire him. And if they can do that, they'll end up, being, they feel like a complete team who's ready to take on the Lakers and make it to the NBA Finals. So that would be the team that I would be looking at as the most intriguing team in that entire 3-team circle in terms of teams that are interested in Lonzo Ball. So we'll have to keep an eye on that and see if maybe that's something that they potentially could go and do. But Now we're going to switch to this. The Chicago Bulls, so far with reports, obviously it's still early in the season, currently have no plans of trading Zach LaVine. There have been rumors, obviously, with the Chicago Bulls not having the greatest season start. You always hear with these types of teams that are not having the best seasons, maybe they're willing to trade a guy. Zach LaVine's been that guy. There's been some interest shown in Zach LaVine around the league. So some people are wondering, would they potentially make a move for a Zach LaVine? Well, the Bulls say right now they have no interest in dealing him to anybody, and that he's a part of their future moving forward. I think this makes sense. I'm sure Billy Donovan feels like, listen, I want to work with this core, really get with this core, and try to see if we can really make it work. Because sometimes we'll see 8, 12 games and think, oh, okay, it's not working. But maybe you look at it. This is a young team. You didn't really have the same training camp and preseason you would have in normal years. And so they maybe feel like maybe it's going to take this team a little bit more time to mesh. And if this team starts to have a moment where they're meshing better, then potentially that could lead to more success. And so that's something, too, that you have to also look at as well. And I think, listen, he's a really good player. And you clearly see he's improved his scoring. Because remember in Minnesota, people thought he was just a dunker. He was just all athleticism. Now he could actually shoot the ball. Now he has more of an offensive game. Because sometimes some players in those positions, when they're not able to fully flourish and develop their games because of the team they're playing on, we don't see the potential they have. Zach LaVine has always seemed like a person who had potential, but we could never see it in Minnesota. That's why he went to Chicago, and he was literally the only guy they had as their best offensive player. You can tell he worked on his game. He developed the jump shot. He developed a three-point shot. And then now he's learned to really develop more of a all-around game. Now, he still isn't someone you want to be maybe your second or first option, but a guy, if he was a third option on a championship team, would be an amazing third option. Because listen, you have to understand something. There's nothing wrong, especially in today's NBA, with sometimes with these super teams or just teams that have like 2-star players. That third option can still be very important. Just knowing if one of the other two guys struggle, Zach LaVine can have a big night. He can ball. It's just nice to know he has that capability to explode offensively because of how he's developed his game. And so you have to look at that and just look at the success that he's had and said, okay, Zach LaVine, if they do end up putting you on the trade market, I'm sure a lot of teams that have championship aspirations might go after him. You could see a Miami. You could see a Dallas. You could see potentially maybe a 76er team potentially, if they maybe want to move off, get a little younger. Maybe, I don't think a lot of other teams maybe would be in that circle. Maybe a team that feels like we're one more guy away. One team I think that should look into it is the Utah Jazz, because I think, you got Michael Conley. He's playing better for you this year. But if you're able to bring in a Zach LaVine with that team, now you have 3 proven guys who can score the ball. I think the Jazz, especially the way they've been playing to start the season, can definitely be a more dangerous team. But we're going to finish it off right there and go into our next break. Coming up next, we're going to get into some more NBA analysis and news, so stay tuned right here on the GSMC Basketball Podcast.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Last segment, we discussed Lonzo Ball potentially being on the move, as some teams have initially basically have said, hey, we have interest in you, Lonzo. We'd love for you to be a part of our team. And there are 3 teams specifically that I named that have shown interest. Now, we have no idea if the Pelicans will actually entertain these offers. I'm not saying these offers have, gotten anywhere yet, or they've even talked, but these are just teams initially interested. Based off how the Pelicans season continues to go, will probably dictate that. Also, we discussed Zach LaVine also potentially being on the move, but it looks like Chicago will not make that move, and he'll be a part of the Chicago Bulls for at least a couple more months. We'll have to see. Again, we don't know, since it's still early in the season, if potentially these teams could sit here and say, hey, you know something? We're not going anywhere. We got some teams interested. Let's see if we can make a good move for the team future. And so that is something that could potentially definitely be on the table. But now I want to get into some discussion about a couple of teams. First, I want to talk about the Utah Jazz. The Utah Jazz are a team that a lot of people have not taken seriously. They don't come off to you as a team that is like, oh, they're going to be good. Now, they're a playoff team. They have some good pieces. They have some good components. But you don't look at them and say, wow, they're a team that's reckoned to be reckoned with. Utah currently is on a 6-game winning streak right now. While this recording is happening, they are currently playing the Pelicans, so we'll see if they end up making a 7-game winning streak. But they currently have a 6-game winning streak right now, 10-4, currently sitting at 3rd in the Western Conference, which I'm sure a lot of people would not have expected. They have played extremely well. But Donovan Mitchell has played out of his mind this season. He has continued where he left off in the bubble, where his great performance. They gave Rudy Gobert that contract. A lot of people question it, including me. But listen, the big key right now is that Michael Conley has played so much better than he did last year. He had injuries in and out of the lineup and could never find a rhythm with Donovan Mitchell. Now, seems like he's in a much better place. If we look at the team, Donovan Mitchell leads the team with 24 points a game. Conley has 16 a game, and Clarkson has 17 a game. Clarkson is definitely going to be in the running at the end of the year for 6th Man of the Year because of the performances he's played, as he's established himself as a 3rd scoring option on the Utah Jazz. Bogdanovich has 13 a game, Rudy Gobert has 12 and 13 a game, and Ingles has 10. They get contributions from literally a bunch of people and want the best from everyone. Now, also Donovan Mitchell is shooting 42% from the field, 38% from 3. Clarkson is shooting actually at a range of 43% from 3 and 49% from the field. And Conley's shooting 41% from 3 as well as Ingles and Royce O'Neal. So they have a lot of guys right now. As a team, they're shooting overall 40% from 3. That is really, really good if you're the Utah Jazz. So you're getting contributions. And like I said, Michael Conley really coming in there, being that other scorer with Jordan Clarkson and Donovan Mitchell has been key. Because honestly, what you always look for is, can we get enough points? Because what's one thing that Utah has always tried to be, even when Donovan Mitchell maybe wasn't even at this level. They were a defensive team. They knew they were going to try to get you into grinded out games. And then it used to be Donovan Mitchell was really the only guy who could score. So it was just like, okay, if we can just get enough from Mitchell and then just enough from everybody else, then maybe we can win. It was kind of like Grindhouse back in the day. And now Donovan Mitchell's playing so much better offensively. Conley, like I said, is giving him great contributions. And then on top of that, you're getting great contributions from Jordan Clarkson off the bench, who has really found his niche. Because remember, Jordan Clarkson for a while in this league, we always knew he could score some points. He was a good, nice player. But we never really knew how good was he. Was he forever going to be? Could he be a starter in this league? Was he always a bench player? Is he really someone who's going to be that first guy off the bench? And with Utah, he has established himself now as that first guy off the bench. You know, he's the second leading scorer on this team. And sometimes that's why that 6-man position I feel like is underrated in the NBA, because people don't realize when you're a 6-man, you are probably getting the 6 most minutes on the team, if depending on how your lineup is, or your top 5 in minutes. And so you really have a guy, with the second unit can come in and still keep up the offensive scoring when Michael Conley and Donovan Mitchell go to sit down. And that's just such a luxury to have, And Snyder has been one of the best coaches. Quinn Snyder's been one of the best coaches in the NBA. Good at developing players, good at developing his team. Because remember, Utah is an interesting place. It's not a huge place, huge market by any stretch, but at the same time, it's not small. It's kind of it's I guess in terms of if you think about markets, they're small. Like I've been told before, Atlanta's not a small market, but it's a small sports market, and that's maybe what Utah is. It's not necessarily the smallest market in the world, but it's not the biggest sports market either. But they've always seemed to always produce. Utah's always been that team historically, even through the time I've watched basketball. They're usually good. Like, they're good in terms of they're good enough to make the playoffs, but never good enough to really be a serious contender. Even from the Darren Williams days and Carlos Boozer. They were good. They were never good enough to compete, but they were good. And even with the Jazz now, they're good. They're good enough to compete, but they're not good enough to actually compete for a championship. And they're constantly looking for something to be, to help them get to that next level. But we'll have to see. That's why I said I think if they were able to maybe acquire a guy like Zach LaVine, that really might be big for them, just to have that other guy. Because like I said, Michael Conley can score, but he's not really a big-time scorer. He's not a go out there, can get you 30 every night, any night of the night. He's a guy who can give you about 15 to 20, 22, 25 a game. He'll give you offensive production, but he's not like a gifted in terms of scorer of the ball. LaVine is more of a better scorer of the ball and would give Donovan Mitchell someone who kind of can play like him. It's okay. And I think that would just give him 4 guys that can really just score the ball. You got Rudy Gobert holding down the middle of the defense. They got some shooters out there. If they could do that, I think they would definitely be one of the better teams in the NBA. For sure, by far. So, Utah, I think, we'll see if they can remain the 3rd seed, which would be big for them to be that high up and to play that well. But they're definitely going to be a team to be reckoned with when the playoffs come around. And a very tough competitive team that may not be an easy out for any team, as you obviously saw with Denver last year. So definitely interested to see what continues to happen with the Jazz. And so now I'll switch to another team that has played well, but they still have holes. They're unfinished. They're not anything by a stretch of the imagination, but maybe have surprised people with how they started the season. And that is the San Antonio Spurs. The San Antonio Spurs are a team that, under Greg Popovich, we've known them for excellence, fundamentals. We've known them for all of those things. And they've had to reinvent themselves from Tim Duncan, Tony Parker, Manu Ginobili, and all of them left. If you remember the Spurs, they were 8-6. Now they're 8-7 after losing to Golden State the other night. But they surprised people because some people thought they weren't as good as it seems. If you think about it, they've beaten the Clippers. They've beaten the Lakers. They've beaten the Trailblazers. They've beaten some good teams. Well, they've also lost to some good teams as well. And so for me, the Spurs are a team that we thought coming into the season with DeMar DeRozan and LaMarcus Aldridge, those are your 2 best players, not playing well. But I think it's the youth of Utah. The young guys who are really kind of surprising some people. You know, I think they're the ones who are kind of helping the Spurs maybe potentially quickly end that playoff drought after missing it for a year. And if that's the case, then Greg Popovich, I guess, does it again. You know, it's really been a big because, you know, Murray has actually been able to stay healthy. He's had injuries the last few years, and he's struggled to stay healthy for this team. You know, Patty Mills, people forget about Patty Mills. Patty Mills is still around. He's playing well. Kelton Johnson from Kentucky, a guy that we don't really think about, but he's only 21. He's played very well for them this year. A young guy, he's averaging 14.7 rebounds. And he's played very well. And then, you know, Lonnie Walker, he's played well as well. So, and then you got DeMar DeRozan, who leads the team in points with DeMarcus Aldridge with 13. And they just have a good mixture of veteran and young talent playing well and trying to continue to play at the level they're trying to play at. So, they're definitely a team that it's going to be interesting to keep an eye on. I think knowing how good the coaching is of the Spurs, it's going to be interesting. I think they're definitely going to be one of the top 10 teams at the end of the season for sure. I think that's a foregone conclusion. I don't think Greg Popovich's team is going to be that bad unless injuries happen. You never know what can happen this season. Now, they do have some issues. You know, with a young team, you always have issues sometimes with late game execution, some late fundamentals. Because, you know, like I said, Spurs have really, over the years, always been a very veteran team. And now they kind of have more of a youth mix in there, trying to make it work in the NBA today. But they're still a really good team. And, listen, that youth can make them a little bit more exciting to watch. Now, they're still not like, oh, wow, the Spurs are on TV, got to watch the game. But they're a little bit more exciting to watch than other times. But it's just good to see the Spurs are still, they never, even after last year, have gotten into this mode of just fully tanking and still fighting and trying to make the playoffs. It just shows you the grit and will and just the spirit of Greg Popovich over this team. But that's all the time we have here for this segment. Coming up next, we're going to finish out the show with more stuff talking about Trae Young and Joel Embiid. So stay tuned right here on the GSMC Basketball Podcast.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Last segment, we discussed the emergence of the Utah Jazz, baby. Utah, singing that sweet jazz. Currently 10-4 in the Western Conference, third seed in the Western Conference. Having a great year. Talking about how Donovan Mitchell continues to play well. Michael Conley seems more comfortable within the system. He looks really good. Jordan Clarkson, definitely right now in the running, or not at the head of the running for sixth man of the year. They've played very, very well. And so, definitely a team trying to make a breakthrough to really show that they're one of the better teams in the Western Conference. And then we also talk about the Spurs. Spurs really just because they weren't supposed to be where they are. They're 8-7 right now, but a lot of people thought they would be worse. A lot of people feel like the Spurs were falling off. you felt like they missed the playoffs last year. They really didn't make too many improvements this year, and now they're still right in the middle of it. They were just 8-6, lost the game, but they're a team that has had some impressive wins this year, a team to look out and say, okay, Greg Popovich got these guys ready, and they're going to be around to stay for a while. But now I want to talk about some Trae Young. Trae Young has been an interesting case this season. If you remember the season, he was averaging 30-plus a game, first 4 or 5 games. Then after Steve Nash made those comments, Trae Young has not played as well since those comments have been made. And his statistics look like this. Ever since the comments, he's only averaged 17 points a game on 33% shooting, 23% from 3 and 84 free throws. Where before the first 4 games, he was averaging 33, 50% from the field, and 35% from the 3. And so he's clearly been affected. He's clearly not playing as well as he's played. And the Hawks' record has really, really diminished since then. They started 4-1. Now they're 7-7. But Trae, I feel like watching him, he just seems off. He just doesn't seem. I feel like his confidence isn't there. I feel like he doesn't seem like the same player. Because really, the Atlanta Hawks, he is their driving force. He is their scorer. He has to play well for them to really break the next step. See, what happens is that he was playing well, and then the supporting cast was playing well, and that's why the Hawks were winning. Now, the supporting cast has still played well, but you don't have that guy who can get you, who's getting you that 30 a night, 25 plus a night, and it's just like, okay, we're not getting that much juice from Trae. Because Trae has been the closer for this team. He has closed many games out for them. And just knowing that he's been struggling, not being able to close out games, the team goes cold. Now they're losing games, and people are trying to figure out what's going on. But they were able to make a big comeback against the Detroit Pistons, which some people consider the worst team in basketball. They were down 15 midway to the fourth quarter, and the Hawks were all the way back to send it into overtime. Game-saving block by John Collins to get it into overtime, and then in the overtime, the Hawks won. But what was really the big story for the Hawks was Trae. Trae in the first half did not play well. He was not playing that well at all. But he only had 7 points, I believe. 8 points to start the first half. He finished the game with 35 plus. So clearly something switched for Trae. Trae played like the Trae Young that we've seen. And he's played it very, very well. He's played at a very high level. And so, to me, that's extremely impressive. That's extremely, incredible. And they're going to need him if they're going to really establish themselves as one of the better teams in the Eastern Conference. Not like a top 4, but a team that's playoff worthy. Because like I said, the Hawks are dealing with a lot of injuries. They have Cam Reddish didn't play. DeAndre Hunter didn't play. They've had good years in their second year. Rondo just came back. The rookie just came. That rookie fifth overall pick has just came back. Gallinari is still hurt. Bogdanovich is hurt. Like they've dealt with a lot of injuries this year. And so the Hawks really feel like when they get fully healthy, that's when this team will fully make that next jump. And so they're really hoping if they can keep their health up, they'll be good to go. And like I said, that game from Trae Young was huge because they need him to be Trae Young. I've talked to people about Trae. They say, why is it, a guy like John Morant gets more praise, more credit, more public publicity, more primetime games, more everything than Trae Young. But Trae Young somewhat is getting disrespected by a lot of people around the league. Why is he not getting the same love? He just averaged 30 and 9. Not anybody could just average 30 and 9. You can't be average and do that. That just doesn't happen. He has to be. Listen, if you want to say he's not the best defensive player, fine. If you want to say he's not one of the best top 10 players, fine. 15, fine. 20, fine. But you can't sit here and tell me he's not one of the better offensive players in this league. You can't say that. And so I think it's a shame that Trae doesn't get the credit and recognition that he deserves, like maybe other guys potentially do in this league. I feel like he deserves it. I think that's why it's been something that I feel like has been motivating him because he knows, okay, people don't view me like they view other guys. And it's not even like, and I'm putting literally, if not better numbers, the same numbers up as them. But they're not getting, that type of credit. So that's kind of the big thing. And so, I think Trae and the Hawks, this is a good start. You never know. These are the type of games sometimes that can... These are the type of games sometimes that can really change a young team around, get them going in the right direction, and really just get them ready to, try to win. So we'll have to see what happens with the Hawks and Trae Young. Like I said, him bouncing back, was important. He hasn't played that well in the last few games, and I think if he can really get his rhythm back, the Hawks are going to look like the way we saw them in the first 4 games and in the last 6. So going to be definitely interesting to see, or not last 6, but last 9. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with this team moving forward. And then we got to talk about Joel Embiid. Yes, sir, Big Bead. So Joel Embiid, he's a guy, people criticize him. He's not dedicated enough. He's not, he doesn't know how to keep himself in shape. He struggles to, be consistent. And now this season, he's played one of his best seasons. So far, he's averaging 26 points a game on 54% shooting and 11 rebounds and 2 assists. His career, he's averaging 24 points a game. So he's beating his career stats right now. Now, his best points season was 2018, where he averaged 27 a game on 48% and 13 rebounds. So that was his best statistical season. But this season, he seems just more dominant. He seems like he's more effective. Even with all the COVID stuff, he seems like he's just in a better place. And Doc Rivers seems to have gotten him motivated, and it has gotten him in a better place. And so that's important because they know how important Joel Embiid is to their success moving forward. They understand they're not going to be winning the games like that without him. And so they know they need him motivated. And with Ben Simmons trying to come along, trying to get himself right. Obviously, he's been in and out of the lineup a little bit this season, but I think the 76ers really do feel like they have a team that can compete in the playoffs. They have a team that can compete for a championship. And Joel Embiid has to be at the center of that. I said earlier in the show, how is Brooklyn going to be able to match up against Joel Embiid? They're going to have to outscore the 76ers. Right now, you can probably say they can. Because, you can even make the argument outside of Embiid, who is really their second best scorer? Tobias Harris? Do you really trust Tobias Harris? That's a real question. That's why some people think the 76ers may look to move off of Tobias Harris to find a better, solid scorer. They're a team that could, like I said, be in maybe the Zach LaVine sweepstakes if that he became available. Because honestly, I think I would trust Zach LaVine more than I would trust Tobias Harris in terms of the score. Tobias Harris can score, but I wouldn't trust him to be my second best scorer. And so I think overall, this team looks really good. I think this team has a lot of potential. Doc Rivers has done a really good job coaching this team up. And like I said, when they've been healthy this year, they have a great record. And that shows you that the commitment they've made to defensive end and them making a lot of good plays down the stretch. One team that's been a thorn on their side is the Boston Celtics, and they had a monster game. Even without Jason Tatum, close game, they beat them. Games like that in the past, the 76ers would lose. And so, if you're a Sixer fan, you kind of look at your team and say, okay, I'm feeling good about them. I'm feeling like, okay, we got this. We are playing well. We think that we're going forward and think that we're going to be really good to go. And that overall, as a team, that they're going to be one of the teams at the end, probably in the Final Four, the way they're playing in the Eastern Conference. I can't wait to see that Philadelphia-Brooklyn matchup because I'm very intrigued to see how the two styles clash against each other. And I'm intrigued to see how the Nets decide to match up against Embiid. And also, I think that may be a series that if the Nets played the 76ers in the playoffs, you maybe won't see it during the regular season, but I definitely think they would probably put KD on Ben Simmons because Kyrie is still smaller than Ben Simmons, and they're going to try to post up Ben against Kyrie. So you'll probably see a James Harden or a Kevin Durant on a Ben Simmons, not because he's the best offensive threat, but more because of that mismatch that he has with Kyrie. So I think that definitely is something that you could definitely see from the 76ers in that regard. But overall, Embiid's been playing really good this season. He looks motivated. He looks healthy. He looks in shape. And if that's the case, the 76ers are going to be a very dangerous team in the playoffs when time comes, and are going to be with the veteran leadership of Doc Rivers and some of the pieces they've put together and the team they're trying to form, a team that you definitely have to watch out for when the playoffs do come around. But that's all the time we have here for this show. Thank you for tuning into the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Thank you for letting me be part of your day. Don't forget to listen to other amazing podcasts here at the GSMC Podcast Network. This is your host, Brice, signing out saying have a good day.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.